Welcome to the Explainer. So, picture this. You've studied a new language for years, right? You've meticulously memorized all the grammar rules, you've pored over stacks of vocabulary flashcards, but when you finally open your mouth to actually speak, you just don't sound, well, natural. You kind of sound like a walking textbook. It's frustrating, and honestly, it's a completely universal experience for language learners. But today, we're diving into the linguistic research to unlock the absolute secret ingredient to true native-like fluency.
So why is writing and speaking in a new language so incredibly tough? Well, the answer actually lies in how most of us were taught from day one. Traditional language learning usually forces us to focus way too much on rigid grammar structures and totally isolated vocabulary words. We're essentially taught to treat words like these separate little entities that we have to actively glue together on the spot. But as linguistic research reveals, that's actually a fundamentally flawed approach.
We've really got to realize that language isn't just bricks and mortar. You know, we so often think of individual vocabulary words as bricks, and the grammar as the mortar holding them all together. But think about it. If you're trying to build a complex sentence, brick by isolated brick in real time while someone is staring at you, you're inevitably going to hesitate, stumble, and sound super clunky. Instead of individual bricks, native speakers actually build language using modular, prefabricated sections.
Okay, so let's look at this secret ingredient. It's what linguists call a lexical chunk. A lexical chunk is basically a fixed or semi-fixed phrase that we store and retrieve from our memory as one single whole unit. You don't build it word by word. You literally just pull it out of your brain ready to go. This completely bypasses the need to constantly build sentences from scratch. It is a massive, massive shortcut for your brain.
So what do these chunks actually look like? Let's break them down using categories from linguist Michael Lewis. First up, we've got polywords. These are really short fixed phrases. Think of everyday combinations like as soon as or by the way. When you're speaking naturally, you don't think about the word as and then soon and then as. You retrieve the whole thing as one solid block of vocabulary. It functions as a single essential unit.
And that naturally builds into something called collocations. These are pairs or groups of words that native speakers just instinctively pair together. For example, we say bread and butter, or we say catch a cold. Right? We don't say capture a cold or seize a cold. If you're relying purely on grammatical logic, capturing a cold makes total sense. But the native-like collocation, the ingrained habit, is to catch it.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the category of institutionalized utterances. These are often full sentences that we use to navigate social interactions. Take the phrase, "Can I give you a hand?" When a native speaker drops this line, it provides instantly identifiable pragmatic meaning. You aren't literally offering someone a physical severed hand, right? You're just offering help. Storing this entire phrase as a single chunk means you instantly know what to say in that specific social situation.
Finally, we have sentence frames and heads, and these basically act as ready-made sentence builders. Phrases like "it is suggested that" or "the fact is" act as highly effective frameworks. As a learner, you can just drop your specific information straight into the empty slots of these streams. You've got the complex structure pre-built for you, which allows you to easily express sophisticated ideas without constantly worrying about messing up the syntax.
So why do these chunks matter so much for your actual learning process? Well, they serve 5 absolutely critical functions. They skyrocket your fluency because you retrieve them instantly, zero hesitation. They boost accuracy because they come pre-assembled perfectly. They actually help facilitate creative language production by giving you flexible base frames to play around with. They guide your language production, kind of acting like signposts in a conversation. And crucially, they lower your frustration and skyrocket motivation, simply because you can quickly say complex things without needing a PhD in the underlying grammar rules.
But here is the real kicker, and it all comes down to a fascinating cognitive reality. Research by linguists Polly and Sider shows that our brains can literally only string together about 8 to 10 isolated words at once. That is a hard, biological, cognitive limit. If native speakers only used individual words, fluent multi-clause speech would be scientifically impossible. Native-like fluency literally requires these prefabricated chunks to bypass our working memory's strict limitations.
Okay, so the theory makes total sense, but let's see it in actual practice. To really understand how this impacts students, we're going to look at a great empirical study conducted in 2009 by researcher Ying Zhao. Zhao put 40 Chinese college students, all non-native English learners with at least 6 years of study under their belts, to the test. The goal was to measure exactly how these learners are using or completely failing to use these essential lexical chunks.
And honestly, this right here is the big aha moment of this explainer. On a multiple-choice test, students were asked to complete a sentence about something being impossible. Many of the students leaned heavily on the grammatical rules they'd been taught and chose it is fully impossible. Grammatically speaking, sure, it works perfectly fine, but a native speaker uses the chunk absolutely impossible. Because the students lacked the chunk in their memory, they essentially Frankensteined their own clunky, unnatural-sounding phrases. Here's another light bulb example from Zhao's study. When they had to describe twins, the students frequently went with the phrase, look very identical. Again, totally grammatically defensible, but to a native ear it just sounds stiff and slightly off. The natural stored collocation is look very alike. This perfectly reinforces the idea that making grammatically correct choices will still fail to make you sound native-like if you aren't actually thinking in chunks.
When we zoom out and look at the broader data from the multiple-choice test, the reality of traditional language learning is pretty stark. The vast majority of the students scored really poorly. To put it into perspective, only about 24% scored an A or B, while over 75% scored a C, D, or failed entirely. Why? Because their traditional learning methods hadn't equipped them with idiomatic chunk storage. They were constantly trying to logic their way through vocabulary rather than recognizing habitual native pairings.
Now, Zhao also tested their language production in written essays. And check this out. Notice the heavy reliance on basic sentence builders, things like firstly or my point is, with 90 instances. But look at the other end of the spectrum. Collocations and institutionalized expressions were barely used at all, even when they had plenty of time to sit, think, and write, and over-reliance on basic grammar instead of a rich variety of chunks severely hindered their overall proficiency.
So what should you actually take away from all of this? How do we fix the problem? Well, it requires a massive pedagogical shift. We literally have to stop seeing language as lexical grammar, which basically means focusing on grammar first with words just plugged in later. Instead, we have to start treating it as grammaticalized lexis. That means vocabulary, specifically these prefabricated chunks and phrases, is actually the star of the show, and grammar just plays a supporting role.
To make this super actionable for your own learning, Michael Lewis provides these core principles for organizing your study. Instead of memorizing a list of random nouns, start learning chunks by topic. Focus explicitly on collocations. Ask yourself what words naturally sit together. You'll also want to learn the phrases used for a notion, like apologizing, while paying close attention to metaphors and the phonology or the literal musical tune of a phrase. Finally, build your vocabulary around keywords like take or make. Approaching it this way is going to completely transform how you study moving forward.
And that brings us to our final question. One I want you to really chew on the next time you open up a language book. Are you still trying to build your new language with individual bricks, struggling to cement them all together in real time? Or are you ready to start gathering prefabricated chunks to finally unlock that effortless, native-like fluency? The science is clear on this one, guys. It's time to change how we learn. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.